couple minutes of Vols fall camp discussion because there is a lot to sort through in Knoxville, Tennessee. Joining us to do that this morning, VolQuest's Austin Price at Austin Priceless, where you follow him on Twitter. Austin, good morning. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great, guys. We got media day this afternoon. We got the first day of practice coming up tomorrow morning, and fall camp is here, and a fall camp with a ton of unknowns, which is, I think, for fans, a little bit scary. For media, kind of exciting, just because it's a long 30-day stretch, and it gives us something to watch for versus kind of like, when you know who the quarterback's going to be, when you know a lot of the positions, it is a grind to get those 30 days. But for us going in not knowing who the quarterback's going to be, not knowing where some of the positions are going to land, it's a little more intriguing, a little more interesting.
It certainly is, Austin, and certainly interesting to learn what is going on with Boo Carter as well. What is the latest on Boo's status, and do you see him being out there today or on the practice field tomorrow as practice number 1 begins for Josh Heupel and his team?
I think it's still to be determined. He is back in Knoxville. I believe he will talk with Tennessee staff today and kind of get a game plan and see what transpires. We'll know something, I think, sometime today. Josh Heupel obviously will meet with the media at 12:45. Maybe we find out before then. Maybe we don't. But I think for Boo, he's got to do right by his team, his teammates, and that's where all this is going to circle back to. When you are not around your team, when you are away from your team, it puts you in the crosshairs with your team. And I think right now, Boo's got to figure out what he needs to do to make up for the fact that he's been away from his teammates. And you have players on this team that have been grinding, that have been putting the work in, that have been sweating and doing all the things you have to do in summertime. And then you have Boo, who missed a chunk of time. And I think for Josh Heupel and company, it's all about finding, what's best for this team heading into, fall camp, because ultimately your chemistry is the most important thing you have going.
VolQuest's Austin Price, our guest. Austin, do you see the Tennessee player-led leadership group making that decision for Josh Heupel? Is this ultimately a Josh Heupel call? What will go into that process of deciding Boo Carter's status, and how much of a say does a guy like Miles Kitzelman, Joshua Josephs, or some of the other veterans on this team have in making that decision?
This is a Josh Heupel decision, but absolutely Josh Heupel is going to take into account what his leadership council has to say. If you've got your team saying, we want this guy on our team, then you're more likely going to give that kid a second chance because the players are going to bat for them. If you have a situation where the team is like, we're better off without this person, then it makes things a little bit more dicey for the head coach on what he decides to do. So I think ultimately you're going to lean on your leadership council, get their collective decision, but at the end of the day, Josh Heupel is the leader of the program. He's got to make the decision that benefits Tennessee the best. And ultimately, I think this comes down to a conversation with Josh Heupel and Boo Carter. And Boo's got to, present well. He has to show his mind is in the right place, that he is, contrite and wants to be a part of the team and will, be a good teammate for his team. And if those things happen, then I think Boo, again, has a path to being back on this football team.
We're joined by Austin Price this morning of VolQuest. Austin, when you look at his situation, I think it's been clarified a little bit that he either plays for the Vols this fall or there's no pathway for him to walk on to another destination. How is that different from, I think, the Wisconsin transfer that's walking on at Miami, that's essentially paying his way in school to walk on?
That's a great question, Ramon. I continue to be told he can't go anywhere else and play because, and correct me if I'm wrong, the kid that went from Wisconsin to Miami did so during the spring, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yes.
So he went during a window of time.
Okay.
I think that's the difference. Otherwise, like, what's stopping? I mean, in today's era where you can, where like Deshaun Bishop was a walk-on, but I mean, he was getting NIL money to pay for school. What's stopping anybody from going and trying to poach some of these players in the middle of the summer? Ooh, I need a corner. Let's go get this guy from this school. You can just walk on here, and you can just leave whatever you want. Like, I think there's a difference there. And again, I could be wrong here, but I was told it's either Tennessee or nowhere for Boo, based off of there's not being a window of time. There's not a portal window right now.
No
and
doubt.
The kid from Wisconsin, I do believe, went and transferred during a portal window. Again, I could be wrong there, but I'm almost positive he transferred during a portal window.
Yeah. With that being said, I feel like we can hammer Boo all day, but there are other questions that have to be answered this fall, man, and it's namely the special team side of it for me because the Vols have always been solid, I feel like, in special teams. Coach Eckler's not there. He's in Nebraska right now. What do we expect from that unit, man, and is it in good hands as it pertains to the changes they've made and the excitement, I guess, with Coach Eckler is keeping your chili pepper hot and all that type of stuff, man? Where are they at in that land of the hidden points and yardage?
Well, the good news for the change in the direction, and listen, they've had coaches that have been very much of a hands-on approach with the special teams that weren't Mike Eckler. Okay, Mike Eckler was the name position coach or the special teams guy, but he had several QCs that were doing a lot of the work, and then Coach Bonamago comes in and. Obviously he's got a long history of coaching special teams in the league and or, in college. And the good news for that group is who your punter is.
Yeah.
You know who your kicker is. You know who your kickoff guy is. And to this point, you know who your punt return guy was. And we'll see what happens with Boo. But at this point, you're just kind of trying to find who your kickoff guy is or are, depending on how many you want back there. And then, again, depending on what happens with Boo, who your punt return guy could be. So I think that's kind of where you're at. Obviously, I think you won't see a whole lot of change as far as your kick units, when you're defending it on a kickoff or on your gunners on a punt or any of that stuff. I don't think that changes really at all because, again, Eckler leaves, but the core group of guys that have been helping with the special teams, they're still there, so they'll run the same stuff they've been running.
No doubt. When you look at this situation, I always like to use the Mad Men Don Draper quote. That's what the money's for. When you talk about Heupel and the decision he's got to make moving forward. But if he finds himself in a situation where Jake Merklinger or George McIntyre become the starter this year, does it complicate Faison Brandon's situation any at all moving forward?
Yeah, obviously. I think that the entire time, Nico was going to be the starter this year. Merklinger was going to be the backup. George was going to push to be the backup. That'd probably be the three for right now. And it was going to be a full-fledged quarterback competition in the spring of 26.
Mm-hmm.
Then it changed. Now, if Joey Aguilar wins the job, then it kind of goes back to what you thought. But I do think it tweaks it with Merklinger because Merklinger knew he wasn't going to be the starter in March. And then when Nico left in April and everybody put QB1, all over social media, it changed. I think it changed Jake Merklinger's outlook and his expectation. So if he doesn't win the job this year, does it make him feel like, I'm probably not going to win it next year? And I think he may view this as his one shot. I know Jake is approaching things right now like he's the starter. He's approaching things like Joey Aguilar never came, and it's his role, it's his job, it's his, this is his moment. And so it's going to be interesting to see if he doesn't win the job, how does he react? Because, you'd like to have Merklinger, George, and Faison battling it out in spring next year. And players know. I mean, how many times did you go through fall camp, Ramon, and go, I know they're saying it's a competition, but this guy is definitely better than this guy at this position. So players know. So I do think it can shift things if somebody else not named Aguilar is the quarterback. I don't think it really affects Faison, so to speak, but I do think it can affect others on campus, depending on how this whole thing plays out long term.
Austin, has your confidence level changed at all that Joey Aguilar is going to be the Week 1 starter in a month against Syracuse? How do you kind of handicap that competition, and what is your feeling on who's got a leg up, if any at all, going into that competition really ramping up tomorrow when fall camp begins?
Well, experience-wise, he has the leg up. But experience in the offense, he has the least of it of anybody. So that's the biggest detriment for him. So he's got to prove he knows the offense, knows the terminology, can handle the terminology to a point where it's second nature. He's not having to look over to the sidelines. He knows everything inside and out. And that could be a tall ask, knowing that he just got here in the middle of May. So he's got to do all that playing relatively mistake-free. He can't go out there and turn it over a bunch of fall camp and expect to be the starting quarterback. So that part of it will be interesting to me to see how all that transpires. I do think if you're asking me to give percentages on it, to me, he has a better than 50% chance to be the starter. I'm not sure it's like some crazy amount because ultimately he's got to go out and prove himself. But again, I think the experience that he has, and again, his maturity. He took 2 years off before he went to JUCO. He's 24. He's the same age as Hendon. So, like, from a maturity standpoint, he is an older player, whereas Jake Merklinger is, maybe 20, depending on when his birthday is. So, like, that's a big deal, 4 or 5 years in life. I mean, think about how much more mature you were at 24 than you were at 20. And I mean, I've still got some immaturity in me at 42, but I still am much more mature than I was at 34, right? Yeah. So I think for him that he has to rely on the experience. I think Merklinger has an absolute shot to win the job, but this is his moment. He's got to go. He's got to hit the gas pedal. He's got to go out there and make plays in fall camp. And the one that's playing to me with no pressure is George McIntyre, because he knew back in March he was never going to play unless it was a blowout situation where they got to the third string quarterback. And now all of a sudden, I think it's changed his mindset. Now, I still think he sees himself as a long shot to win the job, but he can just kind of go out there and freewheel it and, see what happens. So I'm intrigued to watch it all transpire. I wouldn't shock me at all if you're hearing during fall camp, tell you the one that's making some plays is George McIntyre. Again, I don't think he's going to win the job, but at the same time, I think he's got a real shot to, kind of challenge for the number 2 spot if he has a really strong fall camp. So, which goes back to who can win the job out of the older two. I would still lean Joey Aguilar, but I do think Merklinger can absolutely win it with a strong fall camp.
Austin, I think one of the biggest competition and just talented groups on the field is the tight end group this year for 2025, man. They could really utilize 5 guys, I feel like, this year. How exciting is that for a Josh Heupel offense?
Yeah, I don't think it'll ever get to that amount just because I just don't think they'll play. I mean, and especially when they'd love to get back to going tempo more where they don't rotate as much. But I think for Alec Abelin, there is a peace of mind knowing, okay, you have your veteran guy in Miles Kitzelman. You have a guy who's been in the program 3 years now in Ethan Davis. And then you have some young guys that, have shown a lot of promise. Jack Van Doorslater had a fantastic spring.
Yes, he did.
And then Deshaun Brame said, okay, I see you, Jack. And then it turned up the heat all through summer. He's the one with the most upside in the room. Like, the guy who has the highest ceiling is Deshaun Brame. Because he has things physically you can't teach as far as his speed, twitchiness, all that. He's got to prove he can play with his hand in the dirt and be a blocker. If he shows he can do that, then watch out for Deshaun Brame. That's always kind of been the notion, is Jack Van Doorslater because he played defensive line in high school and is a little bit physically bigger and more physical to that point in his career. was probably more ready to play right out of the gate. But Brame has put on weight. He's up over 230. And, again, has a certain skill set that most tight ends don't have. So that one, to me, is really worth watching to see who becomes the number 3 behind Ethan Davis and Miles Kitselman.
He is Austin Price of VolQuest's on 3, joining us Tuesdays at 8:20 here on the show. Vols fall camp getting started. Presser today, practice tomorrow. We'll have you covered all the way up to week 1 and beyond. Great to talk to you, Austin. Appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
Appreciate it, Austin.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate you.
Yes, sir. Austin Price of VolQuest and on 3 joining us as we, from Titans training camp, turn our eyes to Knoxville for a couple of minutes. Well, practice has started.